"You were Nathaniel's wife, not his partner," Gideon Merrick declared before the mourners gathered for the will reading. Clara Merrick sat beneath the painted gaze of 4 generations of her husband's family, her black gloves folded over the small leather tool roll in her lap. Nathaniel had been buried that morning. The rain still shone upon Gideon's shoulders, though his expression held none of a grieving brother's softness. "For 7 years," Clara said, "I regulated his escapements, corrected his calculations, and repaired the commissions he could not finish. You assisted him. I completed work bearing the Merrick name." The family solicitor cleared his throat. No one else spoke. Nathaniel's mother stared toward the cold fireplace, while 2 guildmasters examined the carpet as if its pattern required their full attention. Gideon placed one hand upon the will. "The residence, savings, workshop equipment, and designs belonged to Merrick & Sons under the partnership agreement. Nathaniel could not bequeath what was never his alone." Clara had never seen that agreement. She had seen the account books, however, and knew exactly how much Nathaniel's work had earned. She also knew how often Gideon had entered her repairs under his own name. "My personal tools were kept in the workshop. Anything found upon company premises is company property." Clara tightened her fingers around the tool roll. It contained only a loop, tweezers, an oiling pin, and the narrow screwdriver her father had made for her when she was 12. Everything else, the depthing tool, wheel-cutting engine, files, taps, staking punches, and brass calipers, had been locked inside the Merrick workshop before Nathaniel's body was cold. Her father, Elias Ward, had taught her to repair clocks in the room above his modest shop. He made Clara listen before allowing her to open a case. A clock revealed its injury through rhythm, a dragging beat, a doubled tick, the faint complaint of a worn pivot. She could diagnose mechanisms by sound, polish a bent arbor, and shape a replacement tooth by hand, but she could not manufacture a fine mainspring or cut a new wheel without the equipment Gideon had seized. Nathaniel had once promised that her name would appear beside his on the workshop door. Now even her right to enter that workshop was gone. The solicitor unfolded another document. "There is one property conveyed directly to Mrs. Merrick." Gideon's mouth curved into a restrained smile. The deed described a narrow building at number 17, Cinder Lane, a shuttered clock shop with 2 rooms above it and a cellar beneath. Nathaniel had purchased it 6 months earlier without telling Clara. The property carried £12 in unpaid rates, structural defects cited by the borough inspector, and an order requiring repairs within 8 weeks. "Why did he buy it?" Clara asked. "No reason is given," the solicitor replied. "I can supply one," Gideon said. "My brother possessed a weakness for worthless mechanisms and lost causes." Several mourners glanced at Clara. The insult was deliberate. So was the inheritance. Number 17 would consume the few coins she possessed, then be seized and auctioned. Gideon expected her to abandon it and leave Bellweather quietly. "You may decline the conveyance," the solicitor said, "and receive what instead?" He lowered his eyes. "Nothing." Clara looked once toward Nathaniel's mother. The older woman had embraced her at the funeral, but she offered no defense now. "I accept the property." Before sunset, a maid delivered Clara's clothes to the front steps. Gideon permitted her no final visit to the workshop and refused to release Nathaniel's notebooks, claiming they contained company information. Clara walked to Cinder Lane carrying one trunk and her father's tools. Number 17 stood between a burned bakery and a warehouse, awaiting demolition. Tarnished letters above its bowed window read, "Vale and Quill, Clockmakers." Dust obscured the display, but behind the glass Clara could distinguish dozens of clock faces. The key resisted until she cleaned its teeth with her oiling pin. Inside, 43 clocks occupied the walls, shelves, and floor. Long case clocks leaned beneath dust sheets. Bracket clocks crowded the counter. A regulator without hands hung above the rear door. Several cases were empty, and many mechanisms had been stripped of springs or pendulums. Nothing ticked. Clara lit a lamp and inspected the rooms. Rain entered through the rear roof. The upstairs grate was cracked, the cellar steps unsafe, and someone had recently searched the workbench. Its drawers stood open, their locks broken. She found no food, coal, or bedding. Only one object appeared undisturbed: a walnut wall clock, partially enclosed by later brickwork. Its door had been sealed with black wax bearing the Merrick crest. At midnight, Clara lay awake upon her folded cloak, listening to rain strike the window. She counted the borough clock's distant chimes, and tried not to think of Nathaniel beneath wet earth. The shop remained silent until 2:17. Then the sealed clock struck once. 42 dead clocks answered it. Clara sat upright as the final vibration faded through the floorboards. No clock continued ticking. The shop returned to perfect silence. She lit the lamp with trembling hands and approached the nearest bracket clock. Its mainspring had been removed, yet the bell still quivered beneath the case. A mechanism without stored power could not have released its hammer. Clara opened another clock, then a third. Each bell showed a bright mark where something had struck it from behind. The original hammers remained motionless. Someone had drilled a narrow hole through the back of every case and fitted a separate steel pin against the bell. The clocks had not chimed themselves. They had been made to answer something hidden inside the building. Clara followed one pin through the plaster, but stopped when the wall began shedding damp mortar. Without proper tools or daylight, opening it risked bringing down part of the ceiling. She marked the position with chalk and examined the sealed walnut clock instead. The black wax bore the Merrick crest used before Gideon became head of the firm. Its surface was dusty, but unbroken. The case had no visible winding hole, and later brickwork enclosed 3 of its sides. At 17 minutes past 3, it struck again. The other clocks remained silent. Clara waited beside it until dawn, recording every sound. The sealed clock struck once at 4:17, twice at 5:17, and once at 6:17. The irregular sequence was not marking hours. It resembled coded signaling, though she could not yet identify the pattern. Morning revealed Cinder Lane in all its neglect. Smoke from Bellweather's mills lowered the sky to the color of dirty wool. Factory carts rattled past shuttered shops, while the clock tower, above Merrick Timeworks, dominated the eastern rooftops. Its 4 faces displayed slightly different times. Nathaniel had complained about that tower often. Gideon had refused to let Clara inspect it. A borough officer arrived before she could clear the shop entrance. Mr. Alden Rusk was a narrow man with a red nose and a leather folder protected carefully from the rain. He inspected the sagging roof, cracked chimney, and cellar steps without entering farther than the threshold. £12 in arrears, he said. The rear wall must also be braced, the chimney repaired, and the upper rooms made weatherproof. What will the work cost? £20, perhaps more. Clara possessed 4 shillings and 9 pence. The order allows 8 weeks. 7 weeks and 6 days now. Rusk nailed a notice beside the door. Unless the borough declares an immediate danger. Who reported the building? He closed his folder. Merrick & Sons owns the warehouse behind this row. Gideon Merrick expressed concern that a collapse might damage company property. The warehouse wall stood more than 20 feet away. After Rusk departed, Clara carried her remaining coins to a coal merchant. The woman behind the counter recognized her surname and refused credit. At a nearby bakery, 2 customers whispered that Nathaniel's widow had inherited the cursed clock shop. "What happened here?" Clara asked. The baker stopped wrapping her bread. Nothing anyone benefits from remembering. At 2:17, every clock in the shop rang. The baker's face lost its color. An elderly customer made the sign of the cross. "Do not say that hour aloud," the woman whispered. "It is a time. not an incantation. Ask the Merricks why the old factory bell never strikes 17 minutes past. The baker pushed Clara's penny back and told her to leave. At the Bellweather Clockmakers Guild, Clara requested repair work she could perform from the shop. Master Dobson, who had watched Gideon humiliate her at the will reading, would not meet her eyes. No customer will entrust a movement to an unlicensed widow. I repaired half the movements sold under Nathaniel's name. Then you should have arranged recognition while he lived. Clara placed her father's screwdriver upon his desk. Give me any damaged watch in this room. If I cannot diagnose it without opening the case, I will leave. Dobson's expression hardened. You have already been asked to leave. By noon, Clara had purchased half a loaf, 2 candles, and enough coal for one night. She returned to number 17 and began making the front room usable. She moved the clocks away from the leaking wall, caught rainwater in pans, and braced a cracked shelf with timber, salvaged from the cellar steps. The work exposed a row of thin steel wires behind the skirting board. They ran from every clock toward a vertical iron shaft concealed beside the chimney. When Clara turned the shaft gently with pliers, all 43 striking pins withdrew at once. The hidden system was mechanical, not supernatural, but no weight, spring, or waterline powered it. Clara traced the shaft downward. It passed through the floor beside the unsafe cellar staircase. She tested each step, tied a rope around the upper banister, and descended with her lamp. At the bottom stood a locked iron door, hidden behind stacked crates. Fine steel wires entered through its frame. The floor before it carried fresh boot prints. As Clara knelt to examine them, the sealed clock struck overhead. 1 beat, pause. 2 beats, pause. 1 beat. From behind the iron door, another mechanism answered with 13 rapid strokes. Clara counted the answering strokes twice before they ceased. 13 was impossible for an ordinary striking train. A 12-hour clock possessed no reason to sound a 13th beat unless its maker had deliberately altered the count wheel. She examined the iron door without forcing it. The lock was a precision-warded mechanism, far finer than anything normally fitted to a cellar. The fresh oil darkened the keyhole, confirming that someone still used it. Clara's narrow screwdriver entered less than an inch before meeting a movable plate, a false keyway. Trying to pick it blindly might trigger another mechanism or permanently lock the door. She returned upstairs. Mysteries could wait. Rain could not. Clara spent the morning clearing the front room. She moved a sound workbench beneath the driest section of roof, repaired one shutter with wood from a broken clock case, and stretched waxed cloth across a cracked window pane. An old packing crate became her chair. 2 shelves and a lamp turned the corner into the beginning of a workshop. She hung a small card in the window. Clocks and watches repaired. Honest estimates. By afternoon, someone had smeared mud across it. The first person to enter was a thin boy of perhaps 13, carrying a dented alarm clock beneath his coat. He gave his name as Owen Lyle and placed 3 pennies on the counter. "My mother needs it before 5, he said. "The laundry dismisses anyone who arrives after the boilers are lit." Clara lifted the clock. "Who told you I repair them?" "No one. The sign did." Its ticking was rapid and uneven. Clara listened with the case near her ear, then turned it slowly. "The balance staff is not broken," she said. "It has shifted after a fall. The hairspring is touching the regulator." Owen looked doubtful. "You have not opened it." "I do not need to open a door to hear someone stumbling behind it." The back plate resisted because rust had entered one screw. Clara warmed the metal beside the lamp, touched it with oil, and waited rather than stripping the slot. Inside, she centered the hairspring with her tweezers and corrected the bent regulator pin using the tip of her father's screwdriver. The clock settled into an even beat. Owen's eyes widened. "Mr. Dobson said it needed a new movement. Mr. Dobson wanted to sell you one." She charged him 2 pennies and returned the third. The repair would not remain accurate forever, but it would wake his mother until she could afford a replacement spring. An hour later, Mrs. Ada Lyle arrived, carrying bread, 2 pieces of coal, and an apology for having nothing more valuable to offer. She was a laundress, with reddened hands and a face made older by steam. "Owen says you repaired it while he watched. He has good eyes. He noticed which adjustment changed the beat." Mrs. Lyle glanced toward the crowded walls. Did they truly ring last night? Clara did not ask how the story had traveled so quickly. At 2:17, the woman set down the coal. "My brother died at that hour." Clara waited. 18 years ago, part of Merrick Timeworks collapsed during the night shift. The inquest recorded the accident at 3 o'clock. But everyone on Cinder Lane heard the factory warning bell at 2:17. How many died? The company said 6. Families buried 11. Why was the time changed? Mrs. Lyle looked toward the window before answering. Workers under 14 were not supposed to be inside after 2. A truthful hour would have raised questions about who was employed. The town had not forbidden 2:17 because of superstition. It had been taught not to remember. After Mrs. Lyle left, Clara examined the shop's clocks more systematically. She numbered each case, sketched its position, and tested every concealed striking pin. The steel wires did not connect randomly. They formed 4 separate groups, routed through the walls and floor. Clara turned the vertical shaft by hand, while Owen, having returned out of curiosity, called out which clocks sounded. Their positions created repeating sequences, 1 on the western wall, 2 near the window, 1 above the workbench, then 13 strokes below. Could they be letters? Owen asked. Possibly, or instructions. Clara showed him how a count wheel controlled the number of blows. The hidden system used no count wheels at all. The message was determined by which wires moved and in what order. By evening, they had cleared enough space to test a second sequence. Owen swept the floor in exchange for learning how to remove rusted screws without damaging them. It was the first time anyone had treated number 17 as a workshop rather than a tomb. Before leaving, he pointed toward the handless regulator above the rear door. "You missed that one." Clara had not. Its case appeared empty, and no steel pin passed through its back. Yet when she removed it from the wall, she found a narrow brass pendulum concealed inside the plaster. The pendulum was moving. A cord rose from its suspension spring, crossed the ceiling, and disappeared into the sealed walnut clock. Each swing advanced a tiny drum engraved with 43 positions. The hidden system was counting down. Only 3 positions remained. Clara stopped the pendulum with 2 fingers. The engraved drum halted between its final markings. Whatever occurred at the end of the count, she would not permit it to happen before she understood the mechanism. Owen protested. What if stopping it breaks the message? A careful clockmaker controls the movement before dismantling it. The pendulum's cord passed through a porcelain guide in the ceiling and entered the sealed walnut case. Clara could find no external weight, but the cord remained under tension. Something inside possessed enough stored power to drive both the drum and the concealed striking system. Breaking the Merrick seal would give Gideon grounds to accuse her of stealing company property. She needed to establish that the clock belonged to the shop before opening it. The faded letters above the window offered her first lead. At the Borough Records Office, Clara found that number 17 had once belonged to Septimus Vale and Arthur Quill, precision clockmakers who closed the business shortly after the Timeworks collapse. Nathaniel had purchased the property from Quill's surviving daughter. The sale inventory included 1 sealed master regulator and 43 associated clocks. The mechanism belonged to Briarcombe, no, to number 17, and therefore to Clara. The clerk charged 6 pence for a certified copy. It was more than she could spare, but Gideon had taught her what undocumented truth was worth. Back at the shop, 3 laundry workers waited, with damaged alarm clocks. Mrs. Lyle had told them about Owen's repair. Clara accepted 2 jobs, but refused the third after inspection. "I cannot replace this mainspring without a proper clamp," she explained. The owner looked suspicious. "Mr. Dobson said he could repair it. He owns the necessary equipment." Admitting a limitation cost Clara the commission, but the woman returned the following day with a carriage clock whose fault Clara could mend safely. Honest work began arriving in small quantities. By the end of the week, Clara had earned 3 shillings and 8 pence. She spent 1 shilling on coal, 11 pence on food, and another shilling on tarred canvas and nails. Owen helped secure the canvas across the rear leak, while Clara repaired the window frame. The roof still required professional work, but the front room became dry enough to receive customers. Every penny gained seemed already promised to the rates. At night, Clara investigated the 43 clocks. Each carried a tiny number scratched beneath its dial, invisible, without removing the bezel. The hidden pins struck them in sequences corresponding to those numbers. 1 beat directed her to clock 1, 2 beats to clock 2. The final single beat returned her to clock 1. The 13 strokes from the cellar indicated clock 13. Inside those 4 cases, earlier repairers had engraved brief notes: balance corrected, escapement replaced, layer beneath plate, lock ward false. The first letters formed Bell, but the full instructions mattered more. The cellar lock's visible ward was false, and something lay beneath its plate. On the second evening, Clara permitted the drum to advance 1 position. The clock sounded another sequence. The selected repair notes instructed her to examine the door's escutcheon. She descended with Owen, holding the safety rope from above. Around the false keyhole, 4 decorative rivets appeared identical. Under magnification, Clara saw that 2 bore concentric marks left by a watchmaker's turns. They were screws. Her father's narrow screwdriver fitted them precisely. When she removed the escutcheon, a second keyway appeared beneath it, smaller and protected from dust. Clara did not possess its key, but a maker's stamp beside the opening matched the mark inside the sealed walnut clock. Nathaniel had not built the system. He had discovered it. Someone entered the shop while Clara was replacing the plate. Gideon stood among the clocks, rain shining on his top hat. His gaze moved from the repaired window to the customer's timepieces arranged upon her bench. "You have been busy. I have been working. The borough inspector informs me that number 17 remains unsafe. Merrick & Sons will purchase it for £15 and assume the rates. You called it worthless. I am offering charity." Clara noticed a dark line of cellar dust along one polished boot. "You have been below this shop." For half a second, Gideon looked toward the hidden staircase. "Nathaniel once asked me to inspect the property." "Did he show you the iron door?" Gideon's expression closed. "My brother wasted his final months chasing the delusions of disgraced men. Do not repeat his mistake." After he left, Clara found a fresh scratch across the false escutcheon. Gideon had tried to open the door, but had never discovered the real keyway. That night, she released the pendulum for its final position. At 2:17, the sealed clock began striking. The other 42 answered in a rolling wave, each bell sounding once. The master regulator delivered the 13th stroke alone. The black wax seal split down the center. The walnut door slowly opened. Inside, suspended where the pendulum should have hung, was a small iron key wrapped in paper bearing Clara's name. Clara unfolded the paper without removing the key. The message was in Nathaniel's hand. "If this has opened for you, the shop accepted your regulation. Take a witness below. Do not let Gideon remove the recording drum." Nathaniel had known she would stop the pendulum, inspect the striking sequence, and restart it, accurately enough to complete the count. The mechanism had not been waiting merely for time to pass. It had been testing the clockmaker who entered the shop. At sunrise, Clara brought Mrs. Lyle into the cellar. Owen remained upstairs, with instructions to summon the constable if they did not return within 15 minutes. The iron key entered the concealed keyway without resistance. Clara turned it twice. Behind the door, counterweights descended, and 6 bolts withdrew in sequence. The room beyond was built from fireproof brick and lined with slate. A precision master clock occupied the center, its seconds pendulum suspended inside a glass cylinder. Cables extended from a rotating brass drum toward 43 numbered terminals along the walls. The drum still moved. "This powered the clocks upstairs?" Mrs. Lyle asked. "Part of it did." Clara traced the system carefully. The master clock had once sent timed electrical impulses through insulated copper wires, while a secondary weight-driven mechanism operated the striking pins mechanically. Banks of glass battery cells stood dry beneath the slate bench. The electrical system had not functioned in years, but Nathaniel had restored the mechanical recorder. On the far wall hung a detailed plan of Merrick Timeworks, as it had existed 18 years earlier. 43 red circles marked clocks installed throughout the factory: offices, workshops, loading yards, stairwells, and gates. Thin lines connected them to a central regulator in the timekeeper's room. "They tested the system here before installing it at the factory," Clara said. Mrs. Lyle found her brother's name beside clock 27. The plan identified him not as a laborer, but as a night regulator responsible for reporting deviations. He had been 17 when he died. A second list named 12 other young workers assigned to an area labeled Junior Assembly Room. That room did not appear upon the official factory plan Clara had seen at the borough office. 13 children. 13 rapid strokes. Clara opened the master clock's lower cabinet. Inside, a paper recording strip passed beneath rows of fine steel points. Whenever a connected factory clock sent a signal, one point pierced the paper. The surviving strip contained thousands of tiny holes arranged by time and station number. This was more than a synchronization system. It had recorded when each clock was corrected, when warning pulls were activated, and when connected doors opened or closed. At 2:17, on the night of the collapse, nearly every line changed. The paper ended seconds later. Someone had cut away the section that followed. Mrs. Lyle gripped the edge of the bench. Could it prove the children were there? It could prove which stations sent signals. We need the code assigning each pattern to an event. Where is it? A shallow drawer beneath the recorder stood empty. Its cleaner outline showed that a large ledger had rested there until recently. Nathaniel had removed it. Clara searched the room methodically. She found Vale and Quill's design notebooks, early electrical diagrams, and correspondence with railway engineers interested in adopting synchronized safety clocks. Several letters praised an unnamed woman's improvements to the contact mechanism. The drawings were signed only E.W. Clara recognized the initials. Elias Ward, her father. He had told her that his finest design was stolen before she was born, leaving him without the money to challenge a wealthy firm. He never named the thieves. The contact mechanism in the master clock used the same narrow fork Clara had watched him shape hundreds of times. Her father had helped create the Bellweather system. The Merricks had built their reputation upon it. Beneath the design notebooks lay a trust agreement in draft form. Vale, Quill, and Ward intended a portion of licensing income to support injured factory workers, widows, and apprentices. It bore 3 signatures, but lacked witnesses and a final seal. By itself, it could establish intention, not a legal obligation. The final patent, recording code, and executed trust were missing. A leather case rested beside the master clock. Inside were Nathaniel's lamp, gloves, and a notebook containing only its final page. He had written the date 3 days before his death. Gideon believes the missing record names the workers. He is wrong. It records the doors. At 2:17, The junior assembly room signaled an alarm. 12 seconds later, its only exit was locked from outside. Below those lines, Nathaniel had drawn clock 13 and written one unfinished instruction. Clara, remove the dial and look behind the hour. A heavy impact sounded upstairs. Owen shouted. Someone had entered the shop. Clara locked the chamber and ran upstairs. Gideon stood beside the counter with a bailiff and 2 Merrick workmen. The front door hung crooked, where one man had forced it against the repaired shutter. Owen faced them with a broom held like a staff. "Put that down," Clara said. The boy obeyed without taking his eyes from Gideon. The bailiff presented an order authorizing the temporary seizure of 43 clocks, the sealed regulator, and any associated designs claimed by Merrick and Sons. Gideon alleged that Nathaniel had removed company prototypes and concealed them inside number 17. These clocks were included in the property inventory, Clara said, producing the certified copy from the borough office. The bailiff examined it. Mr. Merrick disputes the seller's right to transfer them. Vale and Quill owned this shop before Merrick and Sons existed. The court will decide ownership. Until then, I am instructed to secure the disputed articles. One workman lifted a bracket clock from its shelf. The steel striking wire tightened behind it. "Stop," Clara said. "They are interconnected. Removing one without releasing the system may damage all 43. Gideon smiled. "Then perhaps you should have surrendered them voluntarily. The order did not mention the hidden chamber, but if the workmen tore clocks from the walls, they would follow the wires directly to it. The recording drum, her father's designs, and evidence from the factory collapse would pass into Gideon's custody." Clara asked the bailiff to read the provision for disputed machinery. It allowed the objects to remain in place under a court seal if she deposited £2 as security and agreed not to alter, operate, or conceal them before the hearing. She did not possess £2. The workman reached for another clock. Clara unrolled her leather tool case upon the counter. Her loop, precision tweezers, oiling pin, and father's handmade screwdriver represented the only means she had of earning money. Without them, she could clean cases and take orders, but she could not perform delicate repairs. "What are these worth as security?" The bailiff shook his head. "I do not value tools." "There is a pawnbroker on Market Row," Mrs. Lyle said from the doorway. She had followed them after hearing Owen's shout. "I will take the tools and return with the money." Clara rested her thumb in the worn hollow of the screwdriver's handle. Elias Ward had placed it in her hand 17 years earlier and taught her never to force a mechanism she did not understand. Surrendering it felt like losing him a second time. She wrapped the tools and gave them to Mrs. Lyle. Gideon watched without satisfaction now. He had expected either surrender or helplessness, not sacrifice. Mrs. Lyle returned with 2 sovereigns and a pawn ticket. The bailiff accepted the deposit, ordered the workmen to replace what they had disturbed, and sealed the master regulator, cellar door, and clock cases with numbered court labels. Clara was forbidden to operate the hidden system or enter the chamber until the ownership hearing in 12 days. "You have purchased a delay," Gideon said. "I have kept evidence out of your hands. You have locked away your own livelihood. My livelihood was never inside those clocks." But when Clara attempted a repair that afternoon, her fingers reached instinctively for tools no longer present. She could not finish the carriage clock promised to Mrs. Haynes. Returning the deposit left her with 1 shilling and 4 pence. By evening, the guild had circulated notice that Clara possessed disputed mechanisms and was accepting work without authorization. 3 customers collected their clocks. The roof fund disappeared with their returned deposits. Owen offered to sell his alarm clock. "No," Clara said. "Your mother needs it." "Then let me work without wages. A person's labor is not worthless because someone powerful says it is." She promised to teach him in exchange for sweeping and errands, but recorded every hour so she could pay him when the shop earned enough. Her father's failed trust had taught her what undocumented promises became. The following morning, Clara brought the borough clerk and a constable to witness the chamber without breaking the court seals. Through its open inspection panel, she showed them the recording drum, factory plan, and Nathaniel's notebook. The clerk prepared a formal inventory. Once entered into the borough record, Gideon could no longer make the evidence disappear without leaving a public absence. The choice cost Clara the secrecy Nathaniel had tried to preserve. It also protected the legacy from belonging to any one person again. Gideon's solicitor objected to the inventory and demanded that Nathaniel's note be excluded as private company material. The clerk recorded that objection as well. After they left, Owen studied the numbered seals. "Clock 13 has the wrong dial," he said. Clara looked closer. The bailiff's seal remained intact across the case door, but the dial visible behind the glass was clean and unmarked. The previous dial had carried a hairline crack between 11 and 12. Someone had exchanged it before the court labels were applied. Clara remembered Nathaniel's unfinished instruction: remove the dial and look behind the hour. Gideon had used the confusion of the seizure to take the one object Nathaniel wanted her to find. At 2:17 that night, every sealed clock struck except number 13. From somewhere beyond the rear warehouse wall, its missing bell answered. Clara measured the delay between the shop's final chime and the answering bell: 1 3/4 seconds. The missing clock was not running independently. Its striking pin remained connected to the hidden system by a long wire passing through the rear wall. Whoever had taken it expected the court seals to prevent Clara from tracing the connection. She marked the sound's direction on the property plan. It originated inside the warehouse Gideon intended to demolish. Mrs. Lyle urged her to summon the constable immediately. Clara did so, believing the official inventory and numbered seals would preserve the evidence until lawful entry could be arranged. It was her first serious misjudgment. By the time the constable obtained authority to inspect the warehouse the following afternoon, demolition work had begun. Laborers were removing roof slates and iron braces under a permit signed by Inspector Rusk. "You cannot dismantle that wall," Clara said. "It supports part of number 17. Rusk consulted his drawings. "The buildings are recorded as separate structures. Your drawing omits the shared chimney and the clockwork shaft." Gideon stood beneath an umbrella beyond the barrier. "Perhaps the widow's ruin was built against our warehouse without permission. It predates your company. Then age has finally caught it." The constable searched the accessible warehouse rooms, but found no clock. Fresh scrape marks crossed the floor toward a boarded section beside the party wall. Gideon refused to allow those boards removed, claiming the area was structurally dangerous. Clara requested an immediate halt to demolition. Rusk denied it. The first brace came down at 4 o'clock. Number 17's rear wall shifted with a sound like a long exhalation. Cracks raced through the plaster behind the regulator. Clara ordered Owen and Mrs. Lyle outside, then returned only long enough to collect the customers' watches from her bench. She could have taken Nathaniel's notebook from the cellar. Instead, she obeyed the court order and left every sealed object untouched. Minutes later, a section of warehouse roof collapsed against the shared wall. Brickwork fell through the rear of the clock shop. The upper floor dropped onto the cellar staircase, and 43 clocks crashed from their shelves in a single violent chorus. Dust rolled into Cinder Lane. The concealed striking wires snapped one after another, sounding broken bells beneath the rubble. The final vibration came from the master regulator below, slowing until it ceased. Rusk declared number 17 immediately unfit for occupation. Clara was forbidden to enter. Gideon argued that the broken court seals made the evidence unreliable and demanded the £2 security be forfeited. The bailiff retained the money pending review. Clara had no home, no tools, no operating workshop, and less than a shilling remaining. That evening, Rain began falling through the exposed roof. The borough allowed Clara and the constable 15 minutes to recover personal possessions. Mrs. Lyle held the lantern, while Owen carried out clothing and repair orders. The front workbench had split, but the customers' clocks survived because Clara had removed them before the collapse. The cellar was worse. Fallen masonry had crushed the slate bench. Glass battery jars covered the floor. The master pendulum lay bent beneath a beam, and water streamed down the walls. Nathaniel's notebook was soaked but readable. Her father's design papers had been scattered into mud. The recording drum had disappeared. A jagged hole now connected the chamber to Gideon's warehouse. Saw marks on the broken timbers showed that someone had cut through the supports before the roof fell. The collapse had not been an accident. Clara found Inspector Rusk's original structural sketch beneath the rubble. Red pencil marked the shared supports clearly. The version he had shown her outside omitted them. She gave both evidence and the cut timber to the constable. Rusk claimed someone else had altered his drawing. Gideon denied instructing the laborers to weaken the wall. Neither denial restored the shop. Clara spent the night in Mrs. Lyle's kitchen. She could not sleep. By morning, the rain had destroyed most of the papers they had been unable to recover. Owen returned to the rubble after the inspector reopened the front room. He found a walnut clock case wedged inside the collapsed party wall. Clock 13. Its dial had been removed, but the movement and bell remained inside. Gideon's men had hidden it within the warehouse only a few feet from the shop. Clara lacked her tools, so she used a sewing needle and kitchen tweezers to lift the hour wheel from its arbor. Beneath it lay a brass disc no larger than a sixpence. The disc carried a railway parcel office number, the date of Nathaniel's final visit to Bellweather Station, and one engraved instruction: claim with E. Ward's regulating key. E. Ward's regulating key was not a metaphor. It was the screwdriver Clara had pawned. The pawnbroker refused to release Clara's tools without £2 and 4p. Clara showed him the brass disc, the station number, and Nathaniel's instruction. He remained unmoved until the constable agreed to witness the screwdriver's temporary use and accept responsibility for its return. At Bellweather Station, the parcel clerk found a long tin box deposited under Clara's name 3 days before Nathaniel died. Its receipt number matched the disc from clock 13. Nathaniel had paid storage for 6 months and instructed that the box be released only to the owner of number 17 carrying Elias Ward's regulating key. Clara inserted her father's screwdriver into the small lock. The handle's worn ridge engaged a hidden lever. The box opened. Nathaniel had removed the missing section of recording paper from the cellar and preserved it between sheets of glass. He had also enclosed the system's codebook, the executed trust agreement, patent assignments, worker lists, correspondence, and a sworn statement witnessed by a solicitor outside Bellweather. Together, the documents explained the forbidden hour. Elias Ward had designed an electrical contact capable of synchronizing distant clocks while recording signals returned from each station. Vale and Quill built the master regulator. Merrick Timeworks financed a factory installation consisting of 43 connected clocks. The inventors did not intend the system merely to display time. Alarm pulls, gates, and workshop doors produced distinct marks upon the recording paper. If machinery failed or an exit was locked, the master clock preserved the precise sequence. At 2:16, on the night of the collapse, a bearing overheated in the main transmission shaft. Workers in the junior assembly room pulled their alarm. 13 underage workers were inside. A factory inspector had arrived unexpectedly at the front office. Rather than allow the children into the yard where they could be seen, Augustus Merrick ordered the junior room secured until the inspector departed. Gideon, then a young assistant manager, carried the instruction to the night foreman. The recording strip showed the outside lock engaging 12 seconds after the alarm. At 2:17, the transmission shaft failed. Part of the floor collapsed, trapping the children beneath machinery and falling masonry. 2 were rescued secretly and sent away with their families. 11 died. Merrick Timeworks reported only 6 deaths and altered the employment books to remove the other names. Mrs. Lyle's brother had been the night regulator. His 13 warning strokes were not an admission of guilt. He had sounded 1 for each child before leaving his station to force open the locked room. He died beside its door. Afterward, the factory clocks were reset to 3 o'clock. Vale, Quill, and Elias removed the test clocks to number 17 and connected their bells to a mechanical recorder. Every strike at 2:17 preserved the true time the Merricks wanted Bellweather to forget. The executed trust established an equally important truth. Elias Ward owned 1/3 of the synchronization design. Vale and Quill owned the remaining shares. They assigned licensing income to a permanent fund for injured workers, widows, and apprentices. Merrick Timeworks received manufacturing rights, but never ownership. Augustus Merrick suppressed the agreement after the collapse, continued selling the system to factories and railways, and kept the licensing income. Surviving contracts still produced annual maintenance fees. The trust possessed not a sudden treasure, but a viable technical service, and years of accounts requiring independent examination. The original patent had expired. The contracts, equipment, records, and improved designs had not. Nathaniel's affidavit described how he discovered the chamber while investigating irregular company payments. He purchased number 17 to place the property beyond Gideon's direct control and moved the decisive documents to the station after Gideon searched the cellar. His final letter was addressed to Clara. "I allowed my family to sell your work under my name because I told myself I was protecting our future. I was protecting my comfort. You were my partner in every way, except the one that required courage from me." Nathaniel had copied 7 years of Clara's repair notes. Each commission showed which calculation she corrected, which movement she completed, and how much Merrick & Sons received. He named her as his chosen successor to the worker trust, not because she was his widow, but because she was the only clockmaker who understood Elias Ward's contact system well enough to restore it. The countdown had been his final test and apology. Clara did not forgive him immediately. A letter could confess cowardice. It could not return the years in which her work had carried another name. But it gave her something grief had denied her, the truth about the man she had loved, including the harm he had finally tried to repair. The parcel clerk, constable, and Mrs. Lyle signed a list of everything recovered. Certified copies were sent to the borough magistrate and a solicitor in another county before Gideon learned the box had been opened. By evening, Gideon knew. He filed to invalidate the trust, claimed Nathaniel's affidavit was written under illness, and demanded possession of the station documents. Inspector Rusk denied altering the structural plans, while demolition laborers began leaving Bellweather before they could be questioned. Clara placed the original recording strip inside the borough strongroom. The clocks had preserved the hour. Her father had preserved the invention. Nathaniel had preserved the proof. Now Clara had to make Bellweather listen. The ownership hearing became a public inquiry after the borough solicitor compared Nathaniel's parcel with the records already entered by the clerk. Too many names, contracts, and altered plans were involved for the matter to remain a private dispute. The assembly hall filled before sunrise. Families of the 11 unreported children stood together near Mrs. Lyle. Railway representatives occupied one bench. Clockmakers, factory workers, reporters, and Merrick employees crowded the rear. Gideon arrived with 2 solicitors and denied every allegation. Clara's £2 security had been released after the constable confirmed that demolition, not her actions, had broken the court seals. She redeemed her father's tools and placed the screwdriver beside the master recording strip. Gideon's solicitor attacked the trust first. The document, he argued, was an abandoned draft supported only by dead men and a resentful widow. Then a solicitor from York produced his firm's retained counterpart. Vale, Quill, Elias Ward, and Augustus Merrick had signed before 2 witnesses. Stamp records and the firm's correspondence confirmed its date. Augustus received manufacturing rights on the condition that licensing income be paid into the worker trust. No payments had ever arrived. The railway contracts named the trust as beneficial owner, although Merrick and Sons had collected every fee. Gideon next challenged the recording strip. Holes in paper, he said, could mean anything Clara wished them to mean. Clara carried a restored portion of Clock 13 to the demonstration table. She connected its alarm pull and door contact to a small recording drum built from surviving parts. The magistrate selected members of the audience to operate the controls so no one could accuse her of arranging the sequence. When Mrs. Lyle pulled the alarm, one steel point pierced the paper repeatedly. When the constable locked the model door, a second line shifted and remained engaged. Clara placed the new strip beside the original from 217. The patterns matched. "The system does not interpret guilt," Clara said. "It records mechanical events. The codebook identifies which event produced each mark." She demonstrated the factory clock sequence in order: overheating bearing, junior room alarm, outer lock engaging, main shaft failure, and 13 emergency strokes from the regulator's station. Gideon rose. The junior door was never connected to the recorder. Clara looked at him. No surviving public plan shows that connection. Realizing his mistake, Gideon tried to withdraw the statement. Only someone familiar with the concealed installation, or the suppressed codebook, would have known which door Clara meant before she identified its station number. Mrs. Lyle then read the 13 names from the hidden worker list. Parish burial records confirmed 11 deaths during the same week. 2 surviving workers had been traced through Nathaniel's notes. One sent a sworn account describing how Gideon delivered the order to keep the children inside until the inspector left. Inspector Rusk's altered structural plan came next. The constable presented both versions: the deliberately cut supports and Clock 13 recovered from the warehouse. One demolition laborer had been found before leaving by train. He testified that Rusk marked the braces and Gideon paid extra to remove them before Clara's hearing. Rusk blamed Gideon. Gideon blamed the dead Augustus Merrick. Neither explanation accounted for the stolen dial, the missing recording drum found locked inside Gideon's office, or the current payments made to the demolition crew. The magistrate could not decide every criminal and civil question in a single hearing. He did not pretend otherwise. He ordered the trust assets and licensing income protected under independent supervision, required Merrick and Sons to submit its accounts, and confirmed Clara as temporary steward until a higher court completed the review. The evidence concerning theft, false records, interference with sealed property, and deliberate structural damage was referred for prosecution. Gideon and Rusk were required to provide substantial bonds and forbidden to destroy or remove company records. The guild's accusation against Clara also collapsed. Nathaniel's commission notes proved that she had completed work sold under the Merrick name. Master Dobson reluctantly acknowledged that several movements he considered Nathaniel's finest contained corrections written in Clara's hand. She did not ask the guild to welcome her. She asked it to enter her authorship in its records. At 2:17 that afternoon, the borough permitted the surviving shop clocks to sound in the assembly hall. Their damaged bells rang unevenly, some loud and others scarcely audible. Clock 13 delivered the final 13 strokes. No one crossed themselves. No one called the hour cursed. The families spoke the children's names after each bell. Gideon was escorted from the hall through a silent crowd. His defeat came not from shame, but from the flaw that had governed every decision. He believed ownership allowed him to alter truth. Each forged paper, stolen mechanism, and purchased silence had created another record against him. Outside, Clara faced number 17's collapsed roof. Winning the hearing had not rebuilt a single wall. The trust accounts would take months to examine, and compensation might take longer. Owen stood beside her, holding the salvaged shop sign. Mrs. Lyle placed a hand upon one end. Without being asked, 3 factory workers lifted the other. The workers carried the sign into Mrs. Lyle's yard, where it remained dry, while number 17 was made safe. No one rebuilt the shop in a week. For the first month, masons installed timber supports and removed unstable brickwork. The rear rooms remained open to the sky, and Clara conducted repairs from a borrowed table in Mrs. Lyle's kitchen. Owen delivered finished clocks before school and recorded every payment in a ledger. Clara paid him by the hour. The independent examination of Merrick and Sons lasted nearly a year. Investigators traced current railway maintenance fees, factory contracts, and funds diverted from the worker trust. Some older money could not be recovered. Records had vanished, companies had failed, and several claims could no longer be proved. What remained was enough to begin honestly. The trust paid number 17's rates and funded only the portion of reconstruction required to preserve its machinery and archive. Clara used income from repairs for the rooms above the shop. New walls rose slowly. Salvaged bricks were cleaned and reused. 31 of the 43 clocks could be restored. The others were preserved in their damaged cases. Gideon was convicted of stealing evidence, conspiring to damage the shop, and falsifying company records. His role in the old factory deaths was entered into the official inquiry, though Augustus Merrick and the foreman who locked the door were long dead. Inspector Rusk lost his position and received a prison sentence for altering structural plans and assisting the deliberate collapse. Merrick and Sons did not disappear. Under new management, it surrendered the trust's designs, submitted its contracts to independent accounting, and paid compensation to the identified families. Its name no longer controlled every public clock in Bellweather. The 11 children omitted from the original report were added to the borough memorial. The 2 survivors gave their own testimony. Mrs. Lyle's brother was formally recognized as the regulator who sounded the alarm and died attempting to open the locked room. His 13 strokes ceased to mean guilt. They became a warning no employer could erase. Clara reorganized the trust around 3 practical purposes. It maintained synchronized safety clocks and alarm recorders in factories and railway buildings. It supported workers injured by machinery. It also trained apprentices who lacked family connections or guild sponsorship. Every apprentice signed a written agreement stating wages, hours, ownership of work, and the right to have inventions recorded under the correct name. Owen became the first. He possessed patience with delicate springs, but an unfortunate enthusiasm for over-tightening screws. Clara made him practice on discarded plates until his hands learned restraint. By 17, he could regulate a carriage clock within seconds per day and explain every adjustment he made. Mrs. Lyle served as one of the worker trustees. She could not repair a watch, but no account escaped her attention. Master Dobson remained cool toward Clara until railway engineers began sending difficult movements directly to number 17. He eventually addressed her as a clockmaker. She accepted the correction without pretending it erased his earlier silence. Clara never placed Nathaniel's name among the inventors. She preserved his affidavit and confession because truth required the whole record, not merely its most flattering parts. He had failed her while living and acted courageously near the end. Both facts remained true. His apology did not restore the partnership he had denied her. It allowed her to stop carrying his cowardice as evidence of her own insignificance. 2 years after the collapse, the repaired sign returned to Cinder Lane. Beneath the original name, a new brass plate read, Clara Merrick, clockmaker and steward. The shop below contained 2 dry workrooms, a public clock regulated from the restored master mechanism, and an archive protected by fireproof doors. The rooms above were modest but warm. Clara's father's screwdriver rested beside her bench, not hidden as a key or displayed as a relic, but used every day. On the anniversary of the factory collapse, families gathered inside number 17. At 2:16, the ordinary ticking ceased. At 2:17, 13 bells sounded, one for each child, locked inside the assembly room, including the 2 who survived. Afterward, the clocks resumed the correct time. The hour was no longer forbidden. People brought damaged watches, factory recorders, railway regulators, and clocks inherited from parents whose names appeared in the trust. Some repairs cost money, others were paid through work or taught in exchange for training. No one was promised that every broken mechanism could be saved. Clara had learned that restoration was not the return of what existed before. Number 17 would never again be the old veil and quill shop. Nathaniel would never become the husband he should have been. Her father would never hear his invention acknowledged. But the building stood. The workers' names remained. The clocks told the truth. One winter evening, Clara locked the front door and listened as 31 restored movements settled into distinct, steady rhythms around her. They did not tick in perfect unison. Each kept time through its own balance, weight, and imperfections. Together, they filled the once silent shop with life.